very slow today.
As long as it doesn't freeze as mine did, then we're good.
Uh-oh. All right. I'm going to hit go live again. It didn't actually go. Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and Rebecca Sive. Rebecca is the author of Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President. We're coming at you here at the end of June. I can't believe this year is half over already. And we're going to talk about some exciting things moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to introduce our guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and really glad to be here. I think we're also coming up on July 4th, and that's a good time to be meeting with our wonderful guest today and talking about the future and the kind of equality that those founding fathers envisioned in every part of our lives. So, and how there can be more founding sisters as we go into new eras. So Erin Vilardi is joining us. As you probably all know, she's the founder and CEO of Vote Run Lead. And about a year ago, she joined us to sort of bring us up to date on what the organization's strategy is. It's a nonpartisan entity which trains women for political campaigns and advocates for women in politics. But we thought, given that we're halfway through the year and well into 2022 and thinking about it, and women are thinking about running and have already decided to run, we're certainly all getting fundraising emails already, that it would be good to talk about the bigger picture and sort of looking ahead also to later in 2021 when there are some important races. And in my view, Erin is right up there at the very best of our analysts and strategists and thinkers on these issues. So I was really glad she could, just back from maternity leave, congratulations again, could join us this evening and share with you what she thinks will be happening, the lessons we should take from the last cycle. So I do want to start, as we typically do, for those of you who may not know our guests, I wanted Erin to share with us just a bit about her personal history and how she got into this, because I think that one of the things that's come up in earlier discussions we've had or podcasts is, there are very many different roles women can play in politics. Some are candidates, some are strategists, some are podcasters, some are writers. In Erin's case, she also started at a very young age and achieved significant responsibilities at quite a young age. And so I want to ask her to share that with us, and perhaps even in that context mention the sort of predecessor project, the White House Project, and Marie Wilson, who really was the genius behind that. So welcome, Erin. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rebecca, for that nice introduction. Yes, I just turned 40 this year, and pregnant in a pandemic. That was fun. We'll talk about those life choices. But, I like many of us, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? We've sort of received a baton that was lit for the first time, or that we continue to light and carry from women who've come before us, who've, carved often were first and onlys, right? And so that woman for me was really Marie C. Wilson, who was the longtime head of the Ms. Foundation for Women, but who, after decades of funding women in an innovative and kind of radical way, was really tired of hearing, giving funds and helping women to pass laws, particularly at the state legislative level, only to see them written away by ultra-conservative legislatures, the next year. And so she founded something called the White House Project that was first of its kind in advancing this idea of women's leadership, and changing the national narrative from talking about women's issues from a victim framework to a talent and leadership framework that we were missing out by not advancing women's rights, by not advancing women as leaders in actually solving those complex problems of the day. And she was, and continues to be a pioneer. She created, Take Your Daughter to Work Day. She's the mother of President Barbie. And as I like to call her, she's my political mother. I have my real mom, Karen, who's awesome, who's probably watching right now on Facebook, who gives you sort of all the love and support that, moms are supposed to do. And then Marie was challenging. She gave me great responsibility at a young age. She set a very high bar. And, it wasn't always, roses and kisses, right? There were tough times when you are really trying to do something really new. In the early 2000s, I remember people saying to us as we went around the country training women to run for office, training women of color and rural women to run for office, well, they're not viable. And even this was in our own philanthropic communities. This was in the progressive community. This was in the women's community, because back then the traditional women in politics had a bob and a set of pearls and usually an Ivy League education or an elite education, at least from maybe one of the women's colleges. So we really had to both work largely within the culture to change the national culture, but also to change who sometimes we thought of our own allies. What does the next great political leader look like? Yeah. And she's still the advisor for our advisory board. We're still in touch. It's pretty great.
That's excellent. So I wanted to talk some about then taking the lessons of 2020 and going forward into 2022. So Vote Run Lead has this Run 51 program, and I talked to Rhonda Briggins month or two ago about the program on Two Broads Talking Politics, and about the sort of 4 states that you're focusing on to get the legislatures up to 51% women. So we want to sort of talk through that, but also then what would it take to move beyond that? So that's 4 states, and that will be excellent. And we're cheering you on to get that done. But what sorts of things do we need to move beyond those 4 states? Are there structural changes within states? Are there individual changes among candidates themselves? What does that look like really to get the whole country to that point?
That's an amazing question, Kelly. That's the goal, right? Is to have a reflective democracy at every level of office, whether that is your, rural, county board, to our state legislatures, to our mayor's offices. It's a set of resources and strategies that are working in tandem. It isn't just groups like Vote Run Lead, training women to run for office. That's a big piece of it, right? We need this groundswell, this continued wave of women who have the political literacy, the civic literacy to run for office. We're still not teaching girls in the same way that we're teaching boys about politics, in our homes and reading the newspaper to them and, tapping them for student government and things like that. So it of course starts there. It of course starts with a number of candidates, right? You can't vote for a woman and if she isn't running. It takes a normalization of that where the voters are feeling comfortable and recognize some of their own bias around women candidates. And it also takes some of these structural changes. We're working on a set of structural changes at Vote Run Lead, but we're big fans of ranked choice voting. And we were talking prior to the podcast starting about the New York City elections. And New York City Democratic primary just took place. It's a very blue city. And so basically there's little competition for the general election. The height of the competition really happens in the Democratic primary. But what you saw for the first time was the use of ranked choice voting in the Democratic primary. And several things are at play here. Nonpartisan groups like ours have been training women to run for office in the 5 boroughs with the support of the New York Women's Foundation, big grants from them to make that possible. We've been readying those folks to run for office, to be on different campaigns for probably now 6 or 7 years. Partisan groups like Eleanor Roosevelt Legacy Committee has been doing more Democratic-based training. There's a group called 21 for 21 that was looking to get 21 women into the city council on a PAC level. Different women of color groups have popped up. And then on top of that, I think also saw the parties, the Working Families Party, the Democratic Party, really put an emphasis on women and women of color candidates and giving them resources in new ways. And then the third layer that I think we need to give a harder look to as part of our strategy and tactics in the women's community is that we voted in this ranked choice voting election. And what that did was allow you to rank the candidates 1 through 5. More women decided to throw their hat in the ring. because it felt less contentious. You needed less resources, fundraising wise, to make yourself viable. You got to go to voters and say, hey, I know you're voting for so-and-so number one, consider me number 2 or 3. It sort of changes how you actually campaign. And voters in New York voted overwhelmingly for it. And so the voter turnout numbers are never as good as they should be, but it was a way, I think, for folks to get more comfortable with a different kind of candidate. And we were flush with good candidates. And we have moved the New York City Council from 1/5 women, where it was about 11 out of the 51 members of the New York City Council were women, which was abysmal for New York City, to what is looking like, when the final votes come in, that the women will be the majority of city council office holders in New York City. That is transformative, accelerated change that is reflective. That is reflective of the people who live and work and breathe in this city. We are the majority of residents in New York City. Now we have the majority of office holders in our city body. And that's the name of the game. So I think it's all three. I think the party's going all in for women. I think the women's infrastructure, and I think the ecosystem with RCV really mattered and made the difference.
Related to that, of course, both in the city and elsewhere around the country, is the messaging, right? And one of the things that I think we've all noticed in these last couple rounds, and certainly in the congressional elections, is the power of the messaging, and certainly a certain kind of messaging that really worked well, particularly for women of color in urban races. And so, of course, one of the wonderful exceptions to that being Lauren Underwood in our hometown.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could talk a bit about the messaging that maybe works more broadly across a range of women. You alluded earlier to rural women. Not all of them are white, but most of the women who are more conservative in rural communities are white. How is it that the messaging can work, in your view, to enable them to understand why some of these points of view about women being in leadership are really valuable and worth fighting for?
Absolutely. So, going back to Run 51, our initiative to get state legislatures to be 51% female, I was talking to a future state Senate candidate today out of Minnesota, and she was talking about climate as a key issue in rural communities, the environment, the land, the water. When I sort of said to her, okay, you're fully qualified, like you have the networks to do this. She's got she was telling me all the folks that she was talking to. I said, what are the 3 key issues that your community cares about? And it was water, land, and climate, and it wasn't necessarily a Green New Deal language, right? It was about infrastructure. It was about jobs. It was all the same things, but it wasn't that, it didn't necessarily have the same label. So I think that you're going to see climate be a cross-cutting issue, I think, for on the right or the left. If you want to run in rural America, you need to be talking about water, land, air, how this relates to where we're going to take mining communities and how we're going to give these predominantly men, right? How we're going to make sure that they have jobs, that they can support their families in the same way that women in the community can have families. Rural communities talking about health. We've seen the shutdown of hospitals. There is research that women in rural America care as deeply, if not more, about the health and the healthcare resources and the ability to be able to drive close proximity to a hospital if their kid got sick. So I do think some of it is back to basics. We know that women are practical. They're in the GSD party. And for those of you who don't know, that's the Get Shit Done party, right? That is the wave that came in 30, 40 years ago, and why people were excited about women was that we sort of put ego aside and actually move an agenda forward. That remains true today. We took a look at the 2018 legislatures. So did the National Women's Law Center. The research shows that more women in these state legislatures pass more bills. They pass more bills than their male counterparts, something like 3 to 1. They brought more money home to their districts. We've long known that about women in Congress. Bring more money home back, pass more bills, co-sponsor more legislation, are doing the work of government. Are getting the budgets of these state legislatures passed on time, right? So the big wheel, the big engine that makes the legislature and policy work. So I'm in the sort of cross-cutting messaging. It's still that women get it done. that when you elect a woman into public office, you are electing somebody who is going to give 110% of them, their full selves, into this job. And they are going to work for you, and they are going to listen to you. Women, especially women of color, tend to actually listen to constituents that are outside of their district, because if you're, the first Latina in the state Senate, I was talking to Patricia Torres Ray, who was the first Latina in the Minnesota legislature in the Senate. She gets Hispanic and Latino voters from all across the state reaching out to her. She receives them. She makes sure they then get connected to their appropriate district representative. But she never says, that's not my job, you're not in my district, right? She's going to work extra hard to make that happen. So I do think some of the messaging for women candidates running right now is that if you don't think government works, I'll be there to fix it. If you think government works, I'll be there to actually make sure you get the resources you need. So whatever side they're coming at you from, your pragmatism and your can-do attitude is a big win for women leaders.
Just a quick follow-up on that. One of the things that is true in the Illinois legislature, where there's significantly more women than there were a couple decades ago, for instance, certainly 40 years ago when we started working on ERA ratification, but they really are distanced by party lines. And so while you're absolutely right, they're there and they, GSD, there's less ability these days for them to work across party lines than there was even 15 years ago. And I'm wondering what your thoughts about messaging are there in terms of how the rest of us can help these women, gee whiz, really come together on this, because we need you to do that.
I am not sure that is possible in the hyperpartisan climate until the primary system for both Republicans and Democrats stops rewarding extremes, particularly on the right. Center-right women cannot get through a primary system in the same way that hard left or center left or women on the left can get through the primary system on the Democratic side. There is a deeper and more rampant layer of sexism. And there's often some tokenism. And so if you're an extreme far right woman, you might have a shot, but I don't know that they're actually supporting your leadership in the real way. So there needs to be open primaries. There needs to be ranked choice voting in the primary system if you want to see more moderate Republican women who are the same thing. You see this with Republican women, they get more done if you look historically. And instead we have a growing number of women whose own misogyny, whose own racism is being rewarded by the party at a time when you have a two-party system right now. One party is unrecognizable. It is truly unrecognizable in the 20 years that I've been doing this work. And we see it. We see women who used to be Republicans signing up for trainings are putting independent. We see them moving into corporate America to go make money and are stepping out of whatever this is. We see them starting their own businesses. We see them, I just did a briefing with a couple of former Republican congresswomen who don't recognize their own party. No matter what you think of Liz Cheney, stepping forward for democracy, she wasn't just chopped off at the knees, she was chopped off at the neck. She may come out in the long run better, but currently right now, I don't know that there's too much of a political risk. The cost benefit for Republican women, center right women is too high. We have to figure out how to lower that. I think that's the challenge for the women's community, because we can't just replace every Democratic man with a Democratic woman, right? Like that is one strategy, but I don't think that actually is a healthy strategy for our democracy. I think you need on both sides of the aisle people who believe in women's rights. As simple as that.
So we're moving into a time now where Generation Z is running for office, is holding office, which is super exciting. Do you see any characteristics among this generation, among the people who are running for office in this generation, that separate them at all from the generations that came ahead of them? What do you see sort of coming forward now?
That's a good question. We have an amazing class of fellows every year. My remarkable Gen Z colleague has created that fellow system and actually made it an equitable fellow system in which we pay a living wage, in which we, have a fair strategy for how folks come in. The outreach is done to make sure that folks of all abilities, all backgrounds, elite schools, community college, have a fellowship with opportunity with Vote Run Lead. And I'll be frank, I thought we were doing a good job giving a $500 stipend and a Metro card and free lunch and all of that stuff, right? So I think that's one of there's a deliberateness, there's an intentionality in this generation that I think as an elder millennial, I have a piece of that, and I have a piece of this like old guard, like, well, we just have to get it done. And there's a different intentionality with Gen Z women. They're like willing to have really tough conversations, from the outset. They're thinking really broadly about the full set of constituents who would be affected by this. They think about equity built in. They think about the LGBTQ community in a really new way that I've noticed. These are things anecdotally that I've noticed. I think other people that have done the research would maybe, I think some of this will be supported, but from my experience, they're intentional, they're deliberate. They're so much smarter than I was. They don't know how to use a telephone. That is true. They don't know how to use a telephone, but I don't know that we're going to need to use telephone. So maybe that's not a big deal. But, there is a way that they look at the world, that what is possible and what can happen in a faster time period. And that things that have always been done this way is not one of the reasons to keep doing them. So they have very fresh perspectives about how to use technology to solve problems. I think you're going to see, as a new generation of young people get in, the sort of techification, if you will, of government. I mean, it is so far behind anyway, but if you see a wave of young folks get in and there is not the simple abilities to sort of zoom in and vote from a rural community on a piece of legislation that you have to be at the Capitol, you're going to see a transformation by young people about how we actually do the business of government, which is exciting to me.
So related to these differing generations, I would say that, for many years until quite recently, women both thought, and I think people told them that they had to be particularly well qualified because it was unusual for a woman to run, or she really had to prove herself the way the men didn't. And of course, the men were supporting other men. And one of the joys, at least to me, of the current generations of women is women choosing to run for high political office, for Congress, who really, don't have a resume, so to speak, that supports that choice of profession. And I think that it's really important for the other women coming up to sort of understand, one part of it is feeling that you do know the issues from lived experience, right? As so many of those women have. But the other thing is a certain level of, I don't know if it's confidence, but I'm wondering if you could share with our listeners, what is it that gives those women who, as I said, on paper may not have that credential, the courage to just go for it and withstand the criticism that comes their way?
Well, I hope, we have been on this message of run as you are since we relaunched. We were once a program of the White House Project. We relaunched in 2014 as a standalone organization. And, following the 2016 election, it was all about run as you are. That in fact, we needed folks that had non-traditional resumes, that the political bodies would be smarter, better, more efficient, get things done, have open, different dialogue, have more perspectives, if we had folks that weren't all lawyers, or weren't all, folks who made $150,000 or more a year and had the luxury to actually work at the legislature that pays $15K in some states. And so the idea that is a deficit, I think, is really being shaken up, right? Those are assets. That fresh perspective is an asset. People maybe want to knock AOC for sort of being a bartender ahead of time, but as someone who worked in the service industry all her way through college, there's no better way to understand a community than to be a service worker, than to serve food, to, knock on people's doors, to, get into the intimacy of a meal or inside somebody's home as a nanny, or these other ways in which you get to really see how people live and think and how they value you, from everything from a tip. So I really think that is a strengths-based approach. I also think that women are beginning to change how fast it takes them to learn something, that this mystery that politics was hard, that you had to be an expert on all of these different policy issues. I think that narrative around politics, that it's an ugly place where nothing gets done and these smoke-filled rooms, was part of a narrative to keep people out. It was part of a narrative to keep women out. And younger women are they're just not afraid to step into those rooms in that way. And I think that's really beautiful. Yeah. And you know what the thing is when we do mapping exercises, because you have to understand also the areas that you need for growth, right? So one of the things we train to is a mapping exercise. So if you are 25 and you're running for the first time, you need to go make some inroads into the old guard. The same way you need to make inroads into, you know, the Asian American community, the same way you would need to make inroads into communities that you may not have this sort of first ring of a touch point with, right? You need to go talk to them and hear what their concerns are and how can you best represent them. So, you know, in the same way, generationally, you still have to reach out to your elders. You still have to build that network of wise women. You know, you wise women, older women have larger networks. They do have more lived experience, right? So you have to be able to sort of tap that intergenerational knowledge base in the women's community and more.
All right. So give us your favorite piece of advice that you want our viewers and listeners to hold close to their hearts.
I mean, my favorite piece of advice is that you are enough. You are enough. You have the skills, you have the talent, you have the guts, the passion to do this. Let a group like Vote, Run, Lead help you unleash all of that, you know, put that in, all that energy into the right place. You know, we're constantly told as women in big ways and little ways to stay small, to sort of play in this lane, or might not this be, you know, where you want to go. But we have to just reject all of that and really sort of stay true to that voice in the back of our heads that says, I'm awesome, I'm enough, I've got this. And whatever that is for you, is it a touchstone? Is it a friend? Is it just looking yourself in the mirror? You know, but it also hopefully will be places and institutions like a Vote, Run, Lead where you can go and you can see a community of other women that just bet on themselves and bet on their ideas and bet on their own leadership and ran as they are and won as they are. I mean, we had an over 50% win rate of our candidates. We had a 71% win rate of women of color in 2020. We had an increase of like bazillion% of the number of women that actually ran. And, you know, we want women right now to be stepping up for the state Senate. You know, everyone's like, well, maybe you should run for House or City Council. No, you got to run for the state Senate. That's where good bills go to die. So we need, you know, great women who are state senators. And believe me, the women in the state Senate want more of you to join them. So my advice is you are enough, you know, and that is something that I got from my biological mother. That is definitely a life lesson that I continue to pass on to my daughters, that, you know, that you're amazing. I mean, I tell my 14-week-old, and I don't know if she understands, but she's an amazing baby. She's also almost sleeping through the night, so she truly is an amazing baby. But you know, it's just, we have to remind ourselves how awesome we are.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And thank you so much, Erin. It was great to be able to catch up with you and get your thoughts on this. So all good wishes to you and the new baby and the older baby. And we'll talk again soon. Take care.